So you may be wondering, how do we distribute apps on the App Store and what goes into that? Well, distributing your app on the App Store is a critical process. Now, it's not one that can be done easily, and it's not one that we can show you end to end, as deploying applications to the App Store requires a lot of additional meta work. Meta meaning that you have to fill in a lot of documentation, you have to put together a lot of resources, you have to look at so many different aspects of your app. But what we do want to give you is the general guidelines that you can go through in order to get your app in the right state to deploy to the App Store and Play Store. Meaning that we're just going to show you how to build a standalone app, create that native build that you can then supply to the App Store and the Play Store. When it comes to the eventual submission process, that is something that we cannot show you, and we do not recommend that you go through with either Meals to Go or Focus Time, as neither app is really set up to be submitted to the App Store, as they are just test apps for learning purposes. Now, you could go and adjust Focus Time or Meals to Go and build out a more rigorous and more well-rounded implementation of all of the different features. And you could try to submit that to the App Store. But at the end of the day, the submission process is one tailored to both platforms. Both iOS and Android have very different requirements in terms of the process you need to follow. Expo has amazing documentation on how to deploy your app to the App Store, what best practices to follow. They have an installation guide for setting up Windows in order to do the builds, and that you have the ability to really understand how to generate these builds, as well as Expo is going to manage the builds for both iOS and Android. So it doesn't really matter if you're on Windows, Linux, or otherwise. As long as you set up your system correctly, you can generate the build and Expo will do the rest for you. Now, knowing that, if you choose to build for iOS or Android, what we're going to show you is solely the basics of generating that build output that you can then go and use to follow along the documentation of the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store to go through the submission process. But getting that native build is the biggest step and biggest hurdle that you will need in order to set yourself up for success when going through that submission process. And so we'll be showing you part of the Expo documentation that takes you through that. And you can always reach back to the documentation in order to set yourself up for success, as well as go to the Expo help and guidelines section, the Expo GitHub. They have a lot of resources if something happens to your build or things are going wrong. But again, do not try to deploy either Meals to Go or Focus Time to the App Store. They are not set up in order to be accepted to the App Store. They are solely learning materials. You can, however, adapt them and adjust them in order to try to go through this process. But again, we will not be helping you go through the individual processes of filling out all of the documentation for Android and iOS. This is merely setting you up for success in order to understand what all goes into it. With that whole prelude, you may be wondering to yourself, well, what exactly are we going to then learn in this section, Mo? Well, let's break that down. Let's break that down so that you understand exactly what you're going to get out of this section. Currently, our app is managed by Expo, so we're running our entire app inside of the Expo infrastructure. In order for us to go to the App Store and the Google Play Store, we need to do something special because currently Expo is kind of the manager of our application. So we need to take what Expo has and we need to output a bundle, a package, so to speak, that the App Store will understand and that the Google Play Store will understand. Now, for the App Store, this is called an IPA file. And for the Android Store, this is called an APK file. And so both of these files are specific to the platform that they will run on. One runs on iOS, the other runs on Android. The output of the bundle that we're trying to generate, we are generating through Expo. Expo is managing this for us, but we have to tell Expo what it's going to build, whether it's going to build for iOS or whether it's going to build for Android. And by doing this, Expo will then give us the outputted package, and what we subsequently need to do is understand where we need to go in order to manage the release process. For the Play Store, we will show you where exactly you can go through the process of doing the release. For the App Store, we will also show you how App Store Connect works. And subsequently, once you know all of these individual steps, you can go and deepen your knowledge on specifically what the release procedures takes, what the common pitfalls are, and understand what exactly you need to do by better educating yourself. But having that end-to-end flow, seeing how you can take our Expo app and generate these output files, and then knowing subsequently where to target what you need to do is enough of a foundation to then go and deepen your knowledge and investigate on your own what specifically you should do for the apps that you then want to release once you go and build an app. Because in most scenarios, in most established companies, the process of releasing to the App Store has already been established. And the process of deploying to the Google Play Store has also already been established. But it's good to have that foundational knowledge of what exactly goes into that process and investigating subsequently on your own. If you wanted to release your own app, knowing where to target these things can be fundamentally important. So we want to show you the basics of generating these output files and then showing you where exactly you can start your journey. Now that we understand the steps that we need to go through, the first thing we need to look at is, well, how are we going to build a standalone app? Because currently our app is mainly running inside of this Expo interface. So getting it outside of that Expo interface is something that we need to focus on. Now, the purpose of this guide inside of Expo is to help us understand how to create the standalone binaries. Binaries? What is a binary? Well, a binary is an output. So think of it like a little box. And in that box, we're going to put everything we need for iOS and everything we need for Android in order to run our app as an app itself on the phone instead of running it inside of Expo, right? We want it to show up here on this screen as its standalone app. So we're going to be building what we call binaries of our iOS and Android app that eventually can be submitted to the App Store and the Play Store. Now, something that you need to understand here is that in order to do this, Apple has something called an Apple developer account, which you need in order to build iOS standalone apps. But the Google Play developer account is not needed to build the Android standalone app. So we're looking at different sets of requirements here. Apple has a way more strict environment when it comes to deploying applications. They require you to pay for a developer account. They require you to have an iOS device. Android, however, can run on Linux, Mac, Windows, it doesn't really matter. And you don't really need the Play developer account in order to build your Android app. They just let you do it out of the box. Now, if you'd like to submit either app to the App Store, you do need that developer account. So the difference here is iOS, you need the developer account to build it locally and even submit it. Google, you don't need the Google Play developer account to build it locally, but you do need it to submit to the store. So it's a good idea to read the best practices of deploying to the app stores to ensure that our app is in good shape. But the difference here is that now that we've reached the point at which we're going to deploy, we're coming into contact with the differences of the different environments, right? We're coming into contact with how Apple works versus how Google works. And so when we look at these differences, this is when a lot of the meta work starts. Meta meaning that we have to do a lot of due diligence and make sure that we're building for the right platform, that we have the right things set in place, that we have the right accounts set up and all of that good stuff. And that's, again, one of the reasons that we want you to just follow along, because getting an Apple developer account, first of all, costs $99 a year. So when we go through the process of looking at how to build these standalone apps, the first thing we need is to install the Expo CLI. Well, good thing we installed that when we started off our journey. So we have the Expo CLI. Now, if you haven't created an Expo account, you should create one when running the build command, because what that's going to do is it's going to link that build to your account inside of your project here, right? So you'll have a project, Meals to Go, and it'll link the build to your project once we go through and build it. Windows users must additionally have WSL installed. Now, this is Windows Subsystem Linux. So it's an additional step that you need to go through on Windows in order to go through the management procedure of being able to build. That's why we suggest follow along and understand the build procedure. What I want to focus on is building a standalone app for every platform separately. So every one of these platforms, Android and iOS, is going to have specific build steps. So let's go through looking at how to build for Android and then look at how to build for iOS. First up is Android. And so if we choose to build for Android, what we're going to see here is that when building for Android, you can choose to build an APK or an app bundle. Well, what's that, Mo? They're different types of binaries. They're different types of outputs that you can upload to the App Store. Now, app bundles are recommended, but you have to make sure that Google Play app signing is enabled for your project. So this is a more complicated step. If it's your first time building, they'll ask you also to upload a key store for Expo to be able to handle it for you. If you don't know what a key store is, they'll generate one for you. Otherwise, you can upload your own. So we'll let them upload it for us. And so if Expo uploads a key store for us, we have to run it later on with the fetch key store and back it up ourselves. That's recommended because they're storing it in the cloud on their end. And so making up a backup of your key store is extremely important because once you submit to the Google Play Store, all future releases must also be signed with that same key store. Think of it like a contract. And Google, once you release with that key store, is going to hold you to that key store. It's kind of like a contract. It's a file that contains information that's going to be specific to our application signing process. So Google just wants to make sure that you are the one signing. So first things first, let's go run Expo build Android. And so over here, if we open up our terminal, what we're going to see is that once I run Expo build Android, it's going to set up my project. So it's going to ask me, what would I want my Android package name to be? And it's going to give me an option, com.mobini.meals to go. So I'm going to accept that. And then it's going to say, what do you want to build? Do you want to build an APK, build a package to deploy to the store or directly to Android devices, or an app bundle? Build an optimized bundle for the store. Well, we're going to choose an APK because then we can install it directly on Android devices if we choose to. So let's choose that. Once this is done building your local JavaScript bundle, what it's going to do is it's going to upload your build to Expo over here. And if we go over to builds, we can see now it's been uploaded and it's been queued. So Expo is going to take over the build for us. We've built our JavaScript, our optimized JavaScript output, and now Expo is going to go through the steps of actually building our Android APK. And once it's done installing that Android APK, it will allow us to download that output so that we can go through the steps of actually deploying it onto the store. So as you can see here, it's at step 5 of 8. It's running Gradle. And with that, we can now keep track of all the builds that we do for Android or iOS. So right now, we're going through the Android build. And once the build is done, we can actually go through and download that APK, install it on the device. So let's wait for that build to finish. And of course, it gives you a link here where you can keep track of the build. And if we click that link, we can go to the same exact screen that I just showed you we were at, where we can see at which phase it's at. So once this build is finished, let's go through and see what we can do with the output of that build.